In this episode, we talk about the concerns surrounding palm oil. We also talk about what the Supreme Court had to say about the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls happening in Bihar. But first, we talk about Manipur, where the government is planning to rehabilitate thousands who have been staying in relief camps across the state. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Since the ethnic conflict between the Meitei and the Kuki-Zo communities began in Manipur over 2 years ago, thousands of people have been displaced from their homes. According to the estimates from the Manipur Home Department, around 57,000 people are currently living in over 280 relief camps spread across the valley and the hills. But now the state government says it is beginning the process of resettling these people in 3 phases. To understand how the state plans to go about this and the challenges it is likely to face, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah.
Sukrita, begin by giving a sense of the scale of the displacement that has taken place in the state since the conflict began in May 2023. And maybe you could also talk about the reason we saw this kind of displacement.
The mass displacement of people from both communities who've been affected by the Manipur violence is one of the biggest fallouts of this conflict. I mean, there are more than 270 people killed by it, thousands injured. And the number of people who've been displaced by this conflict, numerate, because people are displaced across, some people are internally displaced within Manipur. Thousands of people had also gone to Mizoram. People have left the state to work, study in other parts of the country. So it would be well over 70,000 people, right, who've been displaced in Manipur. And that was something that it took place in a mass scale in the very early days of the conflict and continued over time as the conflict also spread to different parts of the state. So in the very early days of the conflict, we had seen this kind of a mass exchange of people take place, something along the lines of a modern day partition. And these include people who lived in the heart of major towns in the Meitei majority valley and in the heart of major towns like Churchandpur and Kangpokpi, and also a huge chunk of Meiteis who were living in More, which is a Indo-Myanmar border town where the majority of the population, or at least the most powerful population, are the Kuki-Zos, and Meiteis were moved from there down to the valley a huge distance. Another significant section, apart from the people who lived in these major towns, are people who live in what have been come to be called the fringe areas or peripheral areas. So the structure of Manipur by now, people who've been following this conflict will know, is of a central valley, which is the Meitei majority valley, and it's surrounded by hills. There are Naga majority hills and there are Kuki-Zo majority hills. So the people who live in these bordering areas, the areas where the Meitei majority valley meets hills which are Kuki-Zo dominated, these areas have been a huge flashpoint throughout the course of the conflict. There's continuously been arson, gunfire exchange between these areas. So huge thousands of people displaced from these areas. Either their villages have been destroyed, attacked, or people who fled apprehending violence, or because, there has been gunfire going on. So, people evacuated these villages. So the mass displacement of people has happened.
And we mentioned earlier that according to the government, some 57,000 people are currently living in relief camps. And, this conflict has been going on for over 2 years now. What attempts have people made during this time to move back to their hometowns?
Yeah, it's been 2 years of the conflict and people have been living in relief camps for 2 years and pitiable conditions, right? A lack of healthcare, a lack of even drinking water to bathe with, exposed to the elements, and the usual issues that will always be there in living in makeshift relief camps. Because, like I said, there's been this partition kind of divide that's come into place in Manipur, right? Until date, people from, for example, the Meitei community do not or cannot safely venture into Kuki-Zo majority hills, and vice versa, right? Kuki-Zo people cannot safely travel, or at least that confidence is not there amongst people, right? People are not willing to venture into the other communities' area. And in the past, it has proved to be fatal as well. So because this has been in place, people have remained in the relief camps that they were housed in. I had traveled to Manipur soon after, around a month after President's rule was imposed in Manipur earlier this year. Some of the senior officials I met told me that resettling at least a fraction of the displaced people is something that is at the top of the agenda. So along with, recovering arms and cracking down on extortion and, allowing, say, enabling movement in the highways to take place. The other major thing is the resettlement of displaced people. And one of the top officials had told me that, in fact, even then, some people had been settled, taken back to their villages. And he said that, we've kept it very low key. We've not publicized this. We've kept it very quiet. And it's been done with a lot of security cover because of the vulnerability. Because these were mostly people who live in these, the peripheral areas that I had described earlier. So from earlier this year, there have been these small scale or in a very quiet way, some people have been resettled. And now earlier last week, the Chief Secretary, Mr. P.K. Singh, he said that now the state is actively working towards resettling the displaced people with the stated aim of shutting down all the relief camps. So there are more than 280 relief camps across the state now by the end of December.
Yeah, and this seems like a very daunting task, resettling thousands of people at a time when tensions have not really subsided. But is the government also deciding to do this now because we have seen a period of relative calm in the state?
Yeah, so there has been, the kind of firing that I was talking about. For the first 1.5 years of the conflict, there was almost constantly like some kind of incident of cross-firing or violence happening in these fringe areas that I spoke about. But that has calmed down for the past several months. The last massive cycle of violence that we've seen in Manipur was in November when, those women and children were abducted and killed in Jiribam district. And then there was a huge flare-up of violence. So that is the last major cycle of violence that we've seen between the two communities. There have been other incidents, but not of, that kind of violence. Last month, there was another flare-up because a Meitei farmer was injured in some kind of firing in Bishnupur district, and then a Kukizo woman was killed in a retaliatory operation by security forces. So that happened last month, so that was disturbed for a bit. But relatively, yes, things have been much more calm in Manipur on that front for several months, and the political situation has changed in the state. However, I think that it might not be that smooth because there are still issues. Bodies representing the Kukizo community have not yet presented any kind of stance on this. But in the past, they have always emphasized that they want political talks to take place before any other major steps unfold. So we have to see how the respective communities will respond to this. That time will tell. But yeah, so it's a massive logistical exercise and it will require a close coordination with stakeholders from both communities to move forward with this.
And tell us, what do we know about how the government is planning to do this? Because we are talking about 57,000 people. And like you mentioned, many areas still remain sensitive. And we also have to consider that a lot of people don't have a home to go back to. Their homes were destroyed. So talk about how the government plans to address that.
So they have roughly bracketed the displaced people into 3 categories. So one is people who live in these fringe areas that I spoke about. And amongst them, people whose houses have not been destroyed. So people who left out of apprehension, like I said, there was firing happening and there was every possibility of them getting caught in the crossfire, or they were afraid that the violence would spread to their villages. So the people who evacuated. So in their case, what the Chief Secretary has said is that the houses have not been damaged of these families. So he's estimated that it's around 7,000, 8,000 such families. But their houses would be dilapidated because they've not lived in the houses for 2 years. So they'll be given some amount of money to repair their houses and they'll be offered assistance to move back. Also, the timeline that he mentioned is a 3-phase rehabilitation. So the first phase in July, which is this month, and then in October and then December. So it is expected, what the government is expecting is that most of the people from this category of people whose homes have not been damaged will be able to move back in this early phase. The second category that they have identified are people whose homes have been destroyed or damaged massively in the violence. So for them, the Chief Secretary has said that the government would provide relief amounting to roughly 3 lakh for them to rebuild their houses at a location of their choice and then move in after that. The third category, which is going to be a significant number of people, are those people who even by December will not be able to move back. which would include those, for example, Mete people from More or Kukizo people who lived in Imphal. So in their cases, unless the situation completely normalizes, it's unlikely that they'd be able to move back. So in their cases, he said that the government would provide prefabricated houses. So these kind of prefabricated houses have already been set up in the state, around 3,000, to house displaced people in different parts. So he said that in addition to this, we will set up another 1,000. So those people who have not been able to move back even by December can move to these prefabricated houses, and we aim to shut down all the relief camps.
And resettling people, of course, is a major goal. But the key issue, of course, is that there is still a lack of trust between these two communities. So has the government said anything about how it plans to bridge that divide? Because even if you were to resettle all these people back to their hometowns and shut down all the relief camps, that issue will still persist, right?
That has been the biggest issue in Manipur throughout, right? Just the lack of breakthrough in political dialogue. So even now, there have been several rounds of talks in the past month, but these are all separately. So the government is meeting, the MHA officials are meeting representatives from Mete civil society organizations. It has held talks with the suspension of operation groups. So basically a set of Kuki insurgent groups separately, but not on the same table. And also the Kukizo organizations, so civil society organizations, had earlier this year met. They had met jointly with Mete CSOs in the presence of MHA officials. But after that, they said that no, we are no longer going to talk. It's pointless. It's not leading to anything. So only the Sioux groups will be authorized to speak to the union government on the behalf of the community. So there are multiple roadblocks and both sides are not meeting at the same table to talk. So that, like you said, is the fundamental issue, and that is where till date we're not seeing the kind of breakthrough that would be required to actually facilitate some kind of understanding.
And next, we turn our attention to the concerns surrounding a particular vegetable oil. Over the past few years, hundreds of social media influencers have started making videos about the science of nutrition. These videos, posted on Instagram, YouTube, and even LinkedIn, often warn people about the dangers of consuming all sorts of things. From bread and artificial sweeteners to protein supplements, everyday fruits, dairy, rice, and even lentils. Almost nothing seems to be off limits. But among them, one item that's been making a lot of noise lately is palm oil.
चिप्स में पाम ऑयल, बिस्किट में पाम ऑयल, नूडल्स में पाम ऑयल, ब्रेड में भी पाम ऑयल.
ये सस्ता जरूर है, लेकिन सेहत के लिए बेहद हानिकारक है. इससे हार्ट प्रॉब्लम्स, डायबिटीज और मोटापा बढ़ रहा है.
सर, पाम ऑयल से सीधा कैंसर के चांसेस बढ़ जाते हैं. सीधा कैंसर के. उसके अलावा
डू यू थिंक कैंसर जो हमारे इंडिया में जो बढ़ रहा है सबसे ज्यादा वो इसी वजह से बढ़ रहा है?
इसी वजह से, क्योंकि आजकल अगर आप
Now earlier this week, perhaps in response to such claims, the Indian Food and Beverage Association said that the use of labels such as palm oil free or no palm oil are misleading and rooted more in marketing than science, adding that palm oil has been consumed by Indians since the 19th century and that the oil has a well-rounded fatty acid profile. So is palm oil really bad for you? Or is the oil unnecessarily getting bad PR like the Indian Food and Beverage Association claims? To find this out, we speak to the Indian Express's Anonna Dutt. Anonna, let's start from the basics. Can you tell us what exactly palm oil is?
So palm oil is basically one of the edible oils which is very frequently used in a lot of the packaged products that we consume. So for example, cookies and chocolates, ice creams. It's also used in a lot of the fast food, burgers, etc. that we consume. So it's one of the widely used vegetable oils. So basically palm oil is something that's extracted from palm fruit. And in fact, it can be of two types. One is palm oil, which is a solid kind of fat that you would get. Also, there is palmolene, which is the, liquid oil that is used.
And Anonna, palm oil has been getting a lot of flack from social media influencers and experts online. So tell us, what is the reason that palm oil is considered bad for us?
So basically, there is evidence to show that palm oil can have negative effects on your health. So if you look at palm oil, significant proportion of it is made of SFA, which is saturated fatty acids. This is the fatty acid which doctors advise against consuming. This is because SFAs are known to increase the levels of bad cholesterol in our body. And a high bad cholesterol level is linked with heart disease. It can also damage the liver. So there's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. All of this, risk of clot formation, which leads to heart attacks and strokes. All of this goes up when we consume a lot of SFAs.
And so tell us, what kind of things should one be looking at while choosing an oil to cook with?
So if you look at any kind of edible fat or oil, it is actually made up of three main things, which is SFA, which is the solid saturated fatty acids. This is what we call the bad kind of fats, which leads to increase in bad cholesterol. Then we have MUFAs and PUFAs, which is monounsaturated fatty acid and polyunsaturated fatty acid. Both of these are good and provide nutrients for different kinds of processes in the body. But when you're looking at what kind of oil you should be using, you should look for the ones which have higher quantities of MUFAs and PUFAs instead of SFA, which is the saturated fatty acid. Other than that, there is also trans fats or trans fatty acids, which are produced especially when, certain oils are hydrogenated. So basically, hydrogenation is a process which solidifies these fats at, lower temperatures. This process can produce these trans fatty acids, which are very harmful for the body. It can lead to an increase in risk of, say, breast cancers, colon cancers, diseases like preeclampsia, which is high blood pressure during pregnancy, or, certain disorders of the nervous system. So these are the main components of an oil.
And ghee is another fat that's high in saturated fatty acids and is commonly used in Indian households. So what are some good alternatives to that?
So when I say that these are the oils which have, high SFAs, I don't mean that you have to completely cut it off. You can have a little bit of ghee, which is very integral part of our diet. So people can consume a little bit of it. It's just that it shouldn't be the primary oil and it shouldn't be used very frequently. For, most of the daily, cooking of food, people should prefer something like a sunflower oil or safflower oil or say a groundnut oil or mustard oil. All of these are, lower in SFAs and have much higher quantities of PUFAs and MUFAs. So these are the oils that people should prefer and ideally have a mix of different oils in their diet.
And also, what do experts say about how much oil one should be consuming? What is considered a healthy amount?
Yes, not just Indian diet, but most cooked food usually contains some amount of oil in it. If you see any kind of food preparation, usually there is some amount of frying or some oils are added on top of the dishes. So there is some use of oil everywhere. And that is why, although we can consume the entire quantity of fat that is needed from, say, nuts or beans, etc., when we have these kind of food products, we can fulfill our fat requirement with just that. But the Indian dietary guideline says that you can have a little bit of oil as well. And what they say is you should restrict your oil intake to anywhere between 20 and 50 grams, which is about, say, 4 to 10 teaspoons of oil per person per day. And of course, when you're an adult who's mostly, not moving around so much, has a sedentary lifestyle, then your consumption should be on the lower end. So that would be about 20 to 30 grams. And adult men who are active and do like at least moderate to strenuous physical activity every day, they can have about 30 to 50 grams of oil. Women should keep it a little lower, about 30 to 40 grams, even if they are active and, doing strenuous physical activity.
Right. So you mentioned that people should be using oils with low SFAs like sunflower oil or groundnut oil. And they should also limit the amount that they're consuming. Anything else that they should keep in mind?
Other than that, what the ICMR guideline, the National Nutrition Guideline that I was referring to, it says that you have to keep a limit on the amount of oil that you're consuming every day. Other than that, you should try to get most of your fat from, say, nuts such as walnuts or seeds like flaxseed, chia seeds, fenugreek seed. All of these can have fat, and that should make up most of your fat in your diet. Other than that, people who can have non-veg meals should go for marine fish, seafoods, eggs. These are also very good sources of PUFA. So a lot of the fat that you consume should come from these healthy fat options instead of just cooking oil. Other than that, it is very important that people do not reheat oils a lot. So even when you're using the good oils which have, good amount of PUFA, what happens is when you heat it up, the PUFAs get oxygenated and they become harmful components, which can again increase your risk of cardiovascular diseases and cancers. So, once you have fried something in an oil, you can use that oil to, say, make a curry the next day. But you shouldn't be using the same oil to fry stuff again. So it shouldn't be used at a higher temperature again. It can be used for a low temperature, sauteing of veggies or, like I mentioned, to make a curry, etc. And the oil should be consumed within a couple of days. It shouldn't be kept for long durations once it has been heated. So these are some of the things that people should keep in mind.
And lastly, Anonna, there is so much content out there and a lot of it is highly exaggerated. So what should be kept in mind while consuming such content?
So first of all, people should keep in mind that a lot of health influencers may not necessarily understand the science behind things that they are saying or know a lot about the topic. Also, one size doesn't fit all. So what might have worked in their case might not work in your case. So it is important that you consult with your own doctors, even if you're looking at, posts by doctors on, say, Instagram or YouTube. Those are general advice, and yes, there are certain things that, people can say, such as, have a healthy diet, sleep enough, exercise. All of this is common advice for everybody, but if you are, concerned about what you should be eating, what works for you, what doesn't, you should consult a doctor or a, nutritionist before switching up your diet, just, based on these posts.
And in the end, we talk about the special intensive revision of electoral rolls happening in Bihar. Yesterday, the Supreme Court suggested to the poll panel to also consider Aadhaar, voter ID and ration cards for the purpose of updating the electoral rolls in Bihar instead of restraining the Election Commission from proceeding with the special intensive revision. The Indian Express's Anant Krishna Ji reported that the vacation bench of Justices Sudhanshu Dhulia and Joy Malia Bagchi said that it was leaving it on the EC to consider its suggestion on the inclusion of these three documents, and if it can find a good reason to discard it, they are allowed to discard it, provided they give the reasons. It directed that the matter be listed for a hearing again on 28th of July before the publication of the draft electoral roll. According to Anant Krishna, Justice Dhulia, who was presiding over the bench that heard a clutch of petitions voicing concerns over the SIR in Bihar, including its timing, said that it was a democratic process and while the court can examine it, it can't stop a constitutional body. But at the same time, it won't allow the Election Commission to do anything it's not supposed to do. He made these remarks as senior advocate A.M. Singhvi, while appearing for a petitioner, urged the court to either direct the revision process to be carried out delinked from the Bihar elections or, in the alternative, stay the process and hear the matter later. The bench's suggestion to consider Aadhaar, voter ID and ration cards for updating the rolls came after senior advocate Rakesh Dwivedi, appearing for the ECI, submitted that the list of 11 documents to be considered for the revision exercise was not exhaustive. Under the Bihar SIR, those who were on the 2003 electoral rolls need to only submit an extract from it as a proof, while others enrolled after 2003 must provide one or more documents from the list of 11 along with a pre-filled enumeration form for existing electors to establish their date and or place of birth, which in turn is used to determine citizenship. Anant Krishna reported that the petition filed by the NGO Association of Democratic Reforms ADR and others, including RJD Minister Manoj Jha, have questioned the revision on various grounds, including the inclusion of Aadhaar and the timing of the exercise just ahead of Bihar Assembly elections. On concerns that the voters will be removed from the rolls if they are not able to produce the documents being sought, Dwivedi said that the ECI, quote, cannot and does not have any intent whatsoever to exclude anybody from the voter list unless and until the hands of the Commission are compelled by the provision of law itself, unquote. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.